Hello again, and welcome to our speaker series of the Soul Care program offered by Volunteer Hospice of Clallam County. My name is Astrid Raffin-Pellows. I'm the Volunteer Services Manager at Volunteer Hospice. I'm very pleased to see such a great response for today's topic, spiritual care, what it is and how it heals, presented by Reverend Lynda Elaine Carré. I encourage you to put in the chat your name and where you're from. It's always nice to know, who is joining us. And I want to address a little bit what Volunteer Hospice is. We founded this organization in 1978. It was a nurse, Rose Crum, who founded it on the Olympic Peninsula in Washington State. We are one of the very few independent hospices offering nursing care without billing Medicare or any other insurance company. We are without any limitations inherent of government-funded agencies. And all our services are provided free of charge, and we have a lot of flexibility in how we offer our services. And one of the flexibilities we have is that we can offer these types of programs. Aside from the speaker series, as part of the Soul Care program, we offer monthly desk cafes. We call them Tea to Die For. They are informal gathering at 4 p.m. tea time in person, where people can share their thoughts about death and dying over coffee, tea, and cake. We do one desk cafe every second Monday of the month in Squim, and one in Port Angeles every fourth Wednesday of the month. All the details are on our website, volunteerhospice.org, under the News and Events tab. Today, I'm very happy to introduce Reverend Lynda Elaine Carré. One of our longtime volunteers told me about Lynda, and so I contacted her, and I now have the privilege of introducing her to you. She has a very impressive background with which she puts to work in accompanying the dying. She says she's grateful to be an elder, and she offers the wisdom of her life's calling to educate, mentor, and companion the aging, the ill, and the dying through end-of-life education, spiritual care, and healing arts. She's an ordained interfaith minister, a clinical palliative and hospice chaplain, a yoga therapist, energy arts provider, death doula, home funeral guide, ritualist, and psychedelic integration therapist. She serves as a clinical chaplain in interdisciplinary teams with the Community Hospice of St. Peter's Health Partners, and she has a private practice called Wellspring Passages for services that include death doula, home funeral guide, rituals, and psychedelic integration services. For more information about Reverend Carré, you can visit wellspringpassages.com. Lynda, thank you so much for being here with us today. I let you take it from here and let you run with it. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. It is a real honor to be here. And one of the things I want to acknowledge is that there are people on here with all different sorts of backgrounds, all different ways that they have come to this kind of service, whether it's for others, for their families, for the community, or for their own self-knowledge, because we're all going to get here sometime. One of the things that I have found seems to be a more difficult or less talked about conversation is really about spirituality, particularly when we receive a difficult diagnosis or when we're starting to age or when we are in the process of dying. In the olden times, it was basically a priest would come and basically give you some prayers, and that's it. Those times have changed. We have learned so much more about the relationship of spiritual care and spirituality. And let me go on with this now. If you don't mind, if you could turn off your videos, thank you. And then we'll bring them back on a little bit later when we do the questions and answers. So as things come up, if you do have some questions, please put them, just jot them down. I guess we're going to do it that way. And then we'll recall them back up at the end. So I hope all of your questions will be addressed. And let's do this. And away we go. Charles, would you mind turning off your video, sweetie? Hi, Chuck. Yeah, at the bottom of your screen, there is a little tiny camera. And if you just click on it, it will take off your picture. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Okay, let's see what we can do here. So this is our subject today, spirituality. And I hope this is going to be very valuable to you so that we will be able to address just a few learning objectives. I hope you have some takeaways from this. Describing spirituality, understanding that spiritual care is health care. Identify just a few symptoms of what we would call spiritual distress or despair. Learn a few spiritual care interventions. And understand that the unique thing about spiritual care is that it is relationship-based care. So what is spirituality? It is that aspect of humanity that refers to the way individuals seek and express meaning and purpose, and the way they express their connectedness to the moment, to self, to others, to nature, and to the significant or the sacred. It's transpersonal is another word for spirituality. It's going beyond the self, but actually connected deeply within the self to that which is around, which is larger than self. A key differentiator is the difference between spirituality and religiosity. Many people think of them as being the same. Spirituality is pretty much, how do I feel connected? What is my purpose? Where do I find meaning? How should I live? Religiosity, religion, is more about what practices, rites, and rituals should I follow? What is right and wrong? What is true and false? Generally from a community context, a religious community context. Where they come together is that individual experience. And combining those, or having just spirituality, is where that individual experience is, what are your beliefs? Where do you find comfort? How do you reflect and relate to what you've experienced and how it affects you? What are your ethics, your values? And where do you come with that sense of awe, with that which is that larger part of you, that part that fills you up, that part that is wondrous? So spirituality is that connection. It's connection with family, community, nature. It could be cultural traditions, animals, beauty, creativity, a higher power from the many different names. Spirituality might also be personal spiritual practices or rituals or habits. There was one woman I was reading with recently, and she goes, I'm not religious. I don't know that I have any spirituality. And yet I looked around, and she was a mad collector of beautiful vases that had cracks in them. There was something about that resonated with her. There was something about finding perfection that was slightly imperfect but held great beauty. And that was her spirituality. Where I work in the Hudson Valley of upstate New York, it's very, very filled with nature. Many people are very much connected to the cycles of nature. And in nature, nothing is ever lost. Nothing ever really truly dies. Nothing is wasted. There is a sense of life going on and on forever. For some people, their spirituality is that when they're in that zone and the creativity. For many people, their spirituality is their sense of gardening, being that zone that you're just filled and it's timeless. And many times there's personal spiritual practices that could be that sense of oneness that people have when they're taking a walk. that sense of oneness when they're taking care of their grandchildren. Spirituality is also making meaning of what happens in our life and the importance that life does matter, knowing that we have a purpose, sourcing the resilience and tapping into that inner healer, the connection of that eternal wholeness that is within each one of us, and trusting that that exists and will show up for us when we need it. Having hope. This is spirituality. So spirituality is, what do we believe in? It's our individual belief systems, which sometimes either strengthen or weaken us. It may or may not include religion, and it actually is an individual's perception, how it's integrated, and their meaning of their lived experience. That is spirituality. In spiritual care, there is a spiritual sense of a soul. In Christianity, it would be called soul. In Judaism, nefesh, ruh, atman, hun, Buddha nature. In psychology, it's psyche. It is that essence. And we could also call it that inner healer that connects us to the transcendent. You can characterize it as the wisdom of that undamaged, whole, healing essence that is within us, that is always returning to wholeness, that is holotropic, returning to a sense of wholeness, holiness. One thing that I think is very, very important, especially in hospice work, is that everyone is a spiritual care generalist. Anyone who has compassion, good training, personal integration that has healed their own wounds, and self-awareness can be an extraordinary spiritual care generalist. In clinical care, in healthcare, there are also spiritual care specialists, and those would be clinical chaplains. I, for example, have studied and trained to specifically work with the medical team, as well as the hospice comfort care team, with seminary education, extensive healthcare training, integration, supervision, all of these kind of things that enable us to work with, I would say, very challenging situations, and also to know how spiritual care and belief systems affect how a patient, how a family is going to receive the interventions of medical care or social work care or home health aid care. All of these things are very, very important to be able to connect the services we provide with belief systems, so they are aligned with the goals of care and the belief system of the people we serve. A little side note, because it's very confusing. Sometimes people think a chaplain is a Christian. A chaplain is actually a title, like a doctor, a nurse, a social worker. Chaplains come from many faith traditions, and clinical chaplains are spiritual care specialists in healthcare settings. And unlike a minister, a imam, rabbi, all of these, you can read this. They serve out of a place of worship, whereas chaplains provide spiritual care in community settings like hospitals, nursing homes, private residence, and it's for people of all belief systems. In our St. Peter's Healthcare Partners, very interestingly, we have 82 designations of religion, spiritual care, and it doesn't just say spiritual care, spirituality. It's like, all of these 82 different ones, 82 different flavors. And even within that, somebody might identify like, oh, say I am, say, this is a wild example, say perhaps they might be Roman Catholic. And yet they might have had some issues with that particular belief system. So even though they identify traditionally, they are no longer practice. And in some ways, their belief systems are causing them some grief and some struggle and some despair nearing the end of life. So even if somebody designates as a certain belief system, a certain religious tradition, it doesn't necessarily mean that it is supporting them. It could or could not. Also, somebody might say that they are Jewish and yet they are not practicing, but their lineage is Jewish. And so teasing out some of those things and finding out what those designations mean to a person can really help you to companion them in this particular journey. Spiritual care is healthcare. One of the things that's very important is that we've had so much great research now about spiritual care, the importance of spiritual care in a healthcare environment. And it has been linked to many positive health outcomes, including reduced mortality, including how people experience anxiety and pain, improved quality of life, coping, all different kinds of things that can be directly related. One of the things I had an experience with is, and I was in a round situation with the whole team on the geriatrics floor at UCLA Hospital, and everyone was concerned because there was one woman who was 86 and she was identifying as having her pain like 8 out of 10 consistently and very emotional, and they couldn't seem to quite manage what was going on or understand. She wasn't being responsive to any of the medications or the other sort of medical interventions. And I thought, clearly this person has experienced some sort of spiritual distress. As it turns out, the woman was totally isolated. She was trying to be very, very stoic and not telling her adult children who lived across the country that she was in the hospital. It ended up that her husband of 68 years had just died like 3 months earlier. And no one had had this conversation with her. And once she was able to talk about it and be heard and be cared for, her pain level went down to a 2 without any sort of intervention. That's a very good example of spiritual distress. And I'll be talking about that a little bit because that's one of the things I really want you to be able to identify and be able to support. Spiritual care is research-based for health. These are just a few pop-out kind of things to let you know there's so much, because the medical situation is not going to be supportive of any kind of discipline unless it really is proven that it is effective. And in their research, it's finding that spiritual care is extremely important in how people perceive their experience, how people are going to respond to the medical care that's offered, and also how the medical team then is going to address the patients. One of the things that's very key for hospice is that when there are spiritual care interventions in the hospital setting that are appropriate, it is much more likely that somebody is going to agree to be hospice eligible and stop doing what I would call heroic life or death extending treatments. And that way they can take fuller advantage of the hospice experiences, which is, I find, is a very important part of life. There are 4 dimensions of the dying experience, and I know that I might be speaking to the choir here. I know many of you are very, very experienced in hospice, some of you more than others. So if this is a little redundant, I apologize, but it doesn't help to get a little review. So the dimensions: physical, obviously, pain and other symptom management; psychological, anxiety, depression; socials, isolation, economic issues; and spiritual, where we get into purpose and meaning. Why is God doing this to me? Why, all of those kind of things. The relationship with the transcendent, a search for ultimate meaning. Did my life matter at all? Reconciliation. Who do I need to forgive? How do I need to be forgiven? Spiritual despair or integration. People tend to go either into integration or despair, or move through despair with spiritual care support into integration. And that gives rise to hope. That gives rise to hope. 76% of patients experience some form of spiritual distress. Fear is huge. People who are facing the specter of dying have a lot of fear and anxiety because they've not been there before. It's not unlike somebody who is giving birth and has not experienced it before. So we educate ourselves. We learn as much as we can about the process so that we can prepare ourselves. Sticking our heads into a hole or pushing back like it's not going to happen to us and only to everybody else is something that is not going to be helpful. And those of you working in hospice, you know that for sure. Without spiritual care at end of life, people can experience severe despair and distress. All of these things. One of the things I think that is the most important in this list is really the fragmented self-regulation. What that is that we move through our lives doing what we can do with a certain amount of confidence and wholeness and trust that we can rely on our own abilities to do things. When we are diagnosed with something or are vulnerable because of some kind of a disease or illness or even the consequences of aging, what happens is that we lose a sense of who to trust. We can't trust our bodies. We might not be able to trust all of the different doctors that we're seeing. We might not be able to trust our families and friends who might be saying, it's all going to be okay. It's all going to be okay, because they can't kind of hold the possibilities that a full range of things could happen. So we lose sense of trust and that sense of wholeness. We become fragmented. And we become fragmented at a time when we are being asked to make very critical decisions about how we want what we have of life left to look like. One of the positive things that can happen with spiritual care, which I love, is that this picture of this man with the sparkly eyes, I absolutely love him. But there is when people have a sense of acceptance and feel supported, they can go into, I have this incurable disease and my life is going to be shortened. So how am I going to use it? And this particular one he made me focus on issues of mortality and raise curiosity. What do they say in religion and spirituality? What do the different traditions have to say about it? And he said, I have a lot of times thinking about these issues, and it is enriched by psychological, intellectual, and spiritual experience at this time. This time of life can be very, very enriching. There was one patient that I had, and he said, I didn't know dying could be so much fun. Friends were coming about. He was accepting it. He wasn't fighting it. He didn't want to die. Absolutely not. But it was happening, and he was making the best of it. Symptoms were managed well, and he was opening up to receiving people that loved him. And he said, I never knew dying could be so much fun. That's kind of a high one for sure. I think it's very important. This is something that we're trying to embed more and more into healthcare, and that is having a spiritual assessment to determine where somebody is in their spirituality and how they use that spirituality, what it is for them, how they use it to cope. And spirituality is considered to be one of the patient's vital signs, and it should be routinely screened and assessed, not only one time, but frequently. As you know, in the dying process, somebody might be moving around, still driving, who knows? And then as it gets closer and closer, sometimes a little bit different pulse happens with the spirituality. Spiritual distress and despair. This is something I'd really like you to be able to understand because it is so incredibly painful for people. Spiritual, emotional, and existential distress results in an especially severe form of suffering. And what that suffering might look like would be like a fog, not really getting it, obsessing, anxiety, fear of abandonment, loss of hope, a complete sense of my life meant nothing. It's a horrible, horrible experience that can give rise to physical pain. And when somebody is unable to find sources of meaning, hope, love, comfort, any connection, and when a conflict occurs between their beliefs and what is happening in their life, that's when it comes together in a crunch, in a crash. Sometimes it happens when people have very fundamental beliefs that might tell them, oh, these are the great ways to, this is how you live your life. This is how we do our traditions. And there's a promise of an afterlife, or this is the way it will happen after you die. There's certain promises. Many religions have different ways that this is going to transpire. But very often there is a gap in that information about what happens in the dying process. That information might not be available. There was one woman who was inconsolably crying of a very fundamental faith. And she was questioning that faith and was feeling tremendous despair. And when I came to her, she looked around like she was going, like there were eyes on the wall, and she goes, but what if there is nothing? What if there is absolutely nothing? And that was her biggest fear, the void. What if all of her beliefs and all of her good works throughout her life were for naught? All of the things she'd sacrificed and believed in, what if they were for naught? So I sat with her, I said, are you willing to just explore what nothing might be like? And she said she would. I sat with her and sat with her and sat with her. And after a while, she just kind of turned over and she looked at me and she goes, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. I'm going to be okay. And what she experienced in that was she experienced, and we talked about it later, in that pause, in that moment of just being companioned and witnessed, she felt this overwhelming flood of love. And that was her nothing. But it wasn't nothing, it was fullness. Some signs of spiritual distress and despair, I think, are important. It's usually, and you might see this, think about some of your experience with some of your patients or your family members, where there is an emotional detachment from themselves and others. No reason for living, just a feeling of emptiness. Sometimes it's called a flat affect. Sometimes it's questioning the very foundations of their life, whether their life or this life has had any meaning or purpose. I find that particularly in my experience, patriarchs and matriarchs of the family, who tend to be the ones that are taking care of everybody else, when it comes to their time to be vulnerable, they have a hard time stepping into the role of being the receiver. And yet, if I point out to them that they are still showing the way, they're still leading their family and how we get through this important time of life, sometimes it can help them have a new sense of purpose. And that's just one of many ways, but that sense of it didn't matter, nothing mattered. I'm going to end, I'm not going to exist at all, can be a tremendously sorrowful and suffering despair. And this is a kind of an example of that woman I told you about that was having so much medication, and was able with spiritual care to just really resolve most of her symptom management. The most frustrating cases really are where pain is so out of control, but there is no physical indication of why that pain should be, no anatomical explanation. And that's because it is spiritual distress. It matters. And unmet spiritual needs have been associated with greater emotional distress, more pain, and poorer quality of life. This will be helpful to you. Some statements of unmet spiritual needs. One of the things that chaplains have a lot of experience with is understanding what people are saying and what they are not saying, and how that also relates to what unmet spiritual needs are being described. A few examples here. I know I've got to find a way to cope, but I just can't manage. I just don't have the strength any longer. So that would be a need for life balance. I think God has abandoned me. I'm no longer able to paint, and it was the painting that kept me in touch with the force that kept me going. That was their spirituality. There's a need for connection. Very often this can happen in a hospital setting or an institutional setting. I'm just a number here. The staff doesn't know who I am. There is a need for values, a need for acknowledgement, a need to be seen, to be valued. I don't know why I'm doing here in the hospital. Why hasn't anybody given me any medicine? There's a lot of that. It's like that need to maintain control. I'm sure many of you have been in hospital situations where the family's all looking at the dials and the numbers, and the person is there seeking for their connection with their eyes, and they're not there because everybody is trying to manage their distress by managing control in a pretty much uncontrollable situation, other than calming down and being present. This is a very common one. It has to do with isolation. My friends don't come and visit me. My family has no idea of what I'm going through here, and I just don't know myself any longer. And that is where there's a loss of identity in this unmet spiritual need. And I'm sure you can have a lot that you're also from your experience. Some signs in other symptoms: sadness, anger, despair. And that's, why me? Why now? Those kind of questions. Afraid to fall asleep, expresses suicide ideation, or it might even be like, if I know that I'm going to die, I just want to die now. People don't want the waiting part. Questions the meaning of life, fear of dying, questions of meaning. Why am I suffering? One of the things that are mostly used in medical settings are actual spiritual assessment tools. And there are many that I counted at one time. I think there were 20 different types of spiritual assessment tools that are used in many settings. And they're extremely helpful to be able to determine what belief systems people hold that are strengthening them or are creating more fear or weakness in them. The one that I'm most familiar with is one called HOPE, HOPE. So it's very easy to remember, and it's an acronym. So it would be like H. What are your sources of hope? What are your sources of strength and comfort and peace? Basically, what sort of things do you call up during difficult times? And O, that means organized religion or an organized spiritual community. Do you consider yourself part of a religious community or a spiritual community? Just to kind of get a sense of that isolation and how that is going to impact somebody that is going through being withdrawn from their usual community. P, do you have personal spirituality and personal practices For some people, that personal spirituality might be being out in nature, for example, or dancing, or their music, or their creative work. And how do all of these things affect how you would like to be cared for with your medical care and end of life issues? So being able, and these can be and from these, you can make goals of care that align with what are the desires of the patient, of the person that you're caring for. And again, these can also change over the time that you're caring for them. So it's important to check in. But spiritual assessment, how it heals, spiritual care heals through relationship-based care. The interventions are one thing, but the actual application are through the spiritual care providers. That is you as a spiritual generalist, or if you are a trained chaplain, that is you as the provider of this. And that provider is the context, the catalyst. So it heals through connection, reflection, acceptance, integration, and through that, spiritual growth and wholeness. Probably the most important connection of all is the sense of presence. And I would say that presence is a verb. Many people think of presence as somebody just sitting on a chair and just being there. But there is a vitality to intentional presence that allows so much healing and so many benefits. We trust that the person's inner healer is available and needs to be able to be held and witnessed. And in that process, the person gets, I matter, I am worthy, someone sees me, I am not alone. And all of those things start to lift that person's spirit, help them to vibrate, to vibrate in a certain way that feels good, it feels warm, it feels like love, activated love. And we can't do it by ourselves. When we are with somebody else, I think it even says in the Bible, when two or more are together in my name, there am I also. There is something about when two people, the patient and one other person, with the compassionate presence, when they're together, there is something else there that helps with the healing. And that connection and presence. Presence opens possibility and clinical insights. Often, with presence, there allows time for different questions to rise up, for different insights to rise up. It allows a safe space to express feelings and beliefs. It supports you matter. I'm paying attention to you. It also provides witnessing. As somebody is struggling, they might be venting, they might be angry, they might be struggling with something, and in the process of that struggle that they need to go through, then they can move through that and they are strengthened and their spirit is growing through that. It encourages integration and meaning making. It acknowledges you matter. God sees you. Presence is extremely important. One of the things I'd like to point out too, that in many situations in a healthcare environment and in a hospice environment, it is the volunteer who is one of the key people, who is a clean slate, a safe person that somebody can share some of their deepest concerns with. They might be protecting their family. They might be giving over their power to authority in other situations. But a volunteer is uniquely positioned to be able to be that person that can allow the person who is dying, the person that is going through their journey, to be able to be free enough and open enough to hear themselves, to see themselves. Another very important aspect of connection is energy. And that is every time when somebody is ill or somebody is off, not feeling right, there is an energetic wobble. There is all, I worked at out of Albany Medical Center, out of the Healing Arts Department for 4 years as a healing touch provider. And it was, very rigorous. Referrals generally came from either the doctors or the nurses or the families. And it was primarily to relieve anxiety and to help people with insomnia, pain, anxiety, and insomnia. And we would go into patients' rooms and do an assessment initially. Where are you in this kind of thing? What would your goals be? And then go through the energetic healing touch process and be able to clear or reset their energy field. And then either they would fall asleep, which was always a really good sign, or they would be able to generally lower their pain scale from anywhere from like an 8 down to a 2. Very important. Anybody, when you walk into a room, you know that you can feel good vibes, not so good vibes, a sense of distance. We have that sensitivity in our bodies. We know that, and you know that. So when you go into a room, be attuned to that and bring in that sense of wholeness that you can carry, and allow that person who is wobbly to be able to reset and rebalance just by your being in close proximity, being grounded, open, non-judgmental. They will feel better. Reflection. This is another sort of intervention, and it's an important step in a person who's going through the journey of coming to grips with the fact that they are in the process of dying or will be dying sometime in the future. And with reflection, it's very healing to allow somebody to do life review. It may be that they need to decide also who they need to forgive, who needs to forgive them. Also, another thing with reflection that's helpful is you can ask, has this anything at this level ever happened to you before? Or has anything difficult happened to you before in your life? And how did you get through that? And help them to recall that in our lives, we die many times to our former selves. And so being able to recall how we went through that and what we learned from that is very helpful. Sometimes we might remember like, oh, that kept happening again and again and again throughout my life, and I got to identify it a little bit faster each time it kept showing up. Things that we are lessons that we are given, I would say. It's not a one-time thing. It's kind of like a spiral, and as we change and grow, keeps showing up until we finally sort of get it, reflect on it. And then there comes a time of acceptance. And the big thing about acceptance is the suffering stops then. We're no longer butting our heads against something that we just don't want and we're fighting against it. We still may not like it, but by accepting it, there is a sense of relief. And when that happens, there can be more meaning making and more of like, okay, what do I want to do with that? How do I want to let people know about how I've gone through this or how I live my life? A beautiful thing. Legacy projects are great. That might be, I need to have somebody that's going to finish this quilt project or finish my book project, or an ethical will might be, it's from a Jewish tradition and I love it. And it's that it could be a paragraph, it could be volumes, but it's what did you learn in your life that you want to pass on to your relatives or to a younger generation? And that allows you to make meaning of your life and also to ensure that your wisdom, what you learned, is going to be moved on through time. Integration. And when people get to a sense of integration, then is also able to hold the complexity of all the things that have happened in their life. There's a welcoming of the peace that is to come. They can start planning, if they have not already, their final exit, how they want it to be, gratitude, kindling of hope. What does that hope look like? Is it a hope to be remembered? Is it a hope that the property that you have is going to be left to be a dog park? All kinds of things. What is it? What gives you hope? And that's an important question to provide, to ask for your patients or your loved ones. And that is, what gives you hope right now? What can you hope for? That's integration. And out of all of this, you might call it post-traumatic growth. When curiosity overrides fear, there's a sense of interconnectedness. There's a transcendence, a self-regulation. Spiritual care facilitates that self-regulation that I brought up. There are 8 core qualities related to spiritual and emotional healing: calm, confidence, curiosity, compassion, clarity, creativity, courage, connectedness. And when you are with a patient or even in your own self, you can kind of say, to what extent am I self-regulated? That's that bigger self. That's that higher power self. To what extent am I self-regulated, self-realized? Am I confident? Where's my courage? Do I feel compassion? Because that self-regulation is sourced from that wisdom of that undamaged whole healing essence, also known as that inner healer. These are some basics. Their journey, not yours. Boundaries, what's okay and not. So this is very important. Sometimes it is hard to know what to say when somebody is sharing at a deeper level. And that is a time to trust that person's inner healer. Allow for spaciousness. In our culture, we tend to be a little bit worried about spaciousness and gaps. But that is where the magic happens. That is where we reconnect in that spaciousness. Sometimes when you think, been there, done that, and you can think of all these ways that you can recommend and you could fix it and you could say, oh yes, if you do this and you do this, it's going to be okay. That's not yours to do. What you want to do is reflect for somebody with, oh, I wonder, or I've noticed, and you can reflect back to them the healing aspects that they have shared with you that you can bring up and reflect back to them so they can see it for themselves. Sometimes it's very hard not to assert our own values and opinions, but absolutely do not do this and absolutely do not proselytize. Something that I share very often in some of the educational things that I do is the importance of attuning ourselves. In between patients, you might see many patients in a day, many people in a day, or maybe it's just that you're going from different family members. An acronym that's extremely helpful to remember is GRACE, and it stands GRACE. So before you go into someplace, ground yourself, like really calm yourself, root yourself into the ground and grow from there. Remember everything in your life that has brought you to the point when you're doing this sort of service and what you were called for, why you're there. Remember that. Attune to yourself. What is going on with yourself? And attune to what it is that you're noticing as you're stepping into the environment. Consider what is needed and then engage. So grace. When I was working in the hospital and would be seeing many patients room to room, unit to unit, it's almost like a palate cleanser. It's almost a reset. And it's extremely helpful to come back into the present moment so that you don't have the residual of what had happened a moment before, and without any concern about what's going to happen in the future. But tune yourself in with grace and open yourself up as a vessel, as a vehicle that is a catalyst for what is arising, what is becoming. It is relationship-based care. The most important thing you can do is be in relationship with that person, with compassion, with empathy, with understanding that we are all humans, that we all have stuff, we are all challenged, we're all wonderful, we're all flawed. And it's not a hierarchy. One of the things that happens often in medical care is there might be seen as somebody is at a more authority level. But in relationship-based care, it really is a matter of I am with you, companioning you side by side. I can go as far as you will allow me, and I am here for you. Compassionate communication. Familiarity with the dying process is important. And also, my picture's in the way, it's presumptive pain indicators. That is also very important. And they're pain indicators we call presumptive because you can see if somebody's lips are very dry and they're cracked, you can feel it in your own body. You know that that's painful. If their eyes are crusted, if there is a contraction, you can assume, you can presume that that is painful because you can feel it in your own body. Here are some evidence-based spiritual care interventions. So relationship-based care, just showing up for somebody else, showing up with compassion, non-judgment. I'm there. I'm opening up for whatever is coming up for you. We're in this together. It's okay. That compassionate presence, a calm, grounded energy. Using spiritual assessment tools is very helpful as a bit of as a guide to help you navigate through things. The goals for those interventions: cultural sensitivity, relevance, and competency that cannot be underscored. You cannot assume that your perception of what healthcare or dying means is the same as the person that you're with. Different cultures have different ways of communicating, different ways of managing stress, different ways of communicating, caring, and showing love. So if you are with somebody that is a parent of there's a clear appearance that there is some kind of a different culture, but you cannot even assume if somebody looks exactly like your twin that you completely understand what their culture is toward these subjects. A very important, helpful intervention is tell me more. I was just with a patient earlier today, and his wife was saying that he was starting his glioblastoma, brain tumor cancer. And he was referring to some cuts on, he was saying, why do I have all of these cuts? And it was he did not have physical cuts. And she was saying, oh no, you're okay, you don't have that, you don't have that. And it made him very agitated because he was clearly seeing it. It also happens with people say, oh, why is that dog over there? Or I just saw Uncle Johnny who died 20 years ago. And you say, oh no, that's not happening, that's not there. It's not helpful. What you can do is tell me more. Tell me more. That way you're much more likely to be able to companion that person and understand better where they are, where their truth is, what is their reality now. Prayer and meditation, absolutely essential. Meaning making, legacy projects, reconciliation, forgiveness. I don't know how many times people have lingered in the dying process, waiting for that estranged child to show up. And sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. Mindfulness. Very important is the timing of, for chaplains, particularly the timing of our initial assessment when somebody first comes into hospice. And it's usually suggested that it be within the first 3 to 5 days. And that is lucky if somebody does take hospice early on and not just 2 days before they die. And then timing within 2 or 3 days before they actually have their actual dying and going into transition. So all through the process, timing is very important also. Spirituality, what it is and how it heals. Thank you. Thank you so much for your intention. And I look forward to having some of your questions and answers. There's so much more to this subject, and I'm very, very passionate about it. And so if you'd like now, you can reveal your videos and let's see what's going on. I hope we have a few questions.
Yes, probably will. Do you still want to share your screen, or
Nope.
maybe? Yeah, here we go.
There we
Here
go.
we are. Yeah. Well, thank you. And I'm going to give the floor to whoever would like to speak. Charlene, maybe you're unmuted. Would you like to say something?
Oh, I didn't unmute on purpose. Just trying to get back in. But I really appreciate it. It's a lot to take in. I was taking notes and listening. I'm not good at both at the same time. I did my best. But this is recorded, you said, right? So
Yes.
we can play it again. That's
Yes.
good. That'll be good. Well, it's so good to hear Lynda again. She was in our community in Greene County here for a few years, and we got to know her in that way as our hospice coordinator in Catskill, New York. And so good to see her and hear her again. So many words of wisdom here today, and I connected with a lot of it. I haven't done any recent active hospice work. I've been on the sidelines, still connected while I've had a few medical problems of my own, but I'm okay, and we'll get back in the game soon. But so glad for Lynda's wisdom, and thank you very much for the program today.
Thank you, Charlene. How generous of you. It's great to see you.
You too. Thank you.
Does anyone else have any comments or questions?
I want to thank Lynda also. That was wonderful.
Janet.
I want to review it as well. I mean, everything, I've heard most of it, but that doesn't mean I've incorporated it all. And your vast experience is just so beautiful to witness. I really am grateful that I was part of, I had to come late. I couldn't get on. It was frustrating. But what I did see, I just realized how grateful that I saw it, and that I'm equally grateful that the Zoom will be available, because I do want to see it again. Thank you so much, Lynda.
Thank you, Janet. And Janet is one of the chaplains in 2 counties in upstate New York.
Lovely, lovely. Yeah, I mean, I second that. There is a lot to unpack in your presentation. It's extremely rich and deep. And I know for my part, I will have to go and watch the recording more than once. And I highly recommend, that we do so. There was so much there, so much. This was really an excellent way of introducing us, or of reminding us, what spiritual care is. And if I may, I really like the way that you mentioned how, a person who is at the end of life, who has been like a matriarch or a patriarch, an elder, basically, can still have that identity by leading the way into the end of life. Just as they led the way into life, it continues, by showing us how they die. And this was really kind of an interesting twist for me, especially. My father is still alive at 98 and feeling completely useless.
Mm.
Just like, what am I doing here? What's going on? And so I've been trying to talk to him in ways like, yes, you're still needed, you're still loved, we still want you. And he has his cognitive abilities entirely. So, I mean, it's wonderful. And so I'm really going to, ease into that more with him, because I think that he gets, hopeless otherwise. And so thank you for reminding me of that.
You are so welcome. And I find that that is extremely important. And when you said that, I just got a truth chill. And it's one thing to say that you are valuable, you are needed, you're purposeful. It's one thing to say that. And then there's another thing for people to show up and say, tell me about your life. Tell me what you've learned. Ask for advice, those kind of things. There's a difference between just getting older and being an elder. And an elder is somebody who is flowing through the ability to share their wisdom. But I'll tell you, that particular pearl of wisdom happened to me when I found myself again and again with these lessons of people in despair. And they were very much the matriarchs and the high power patriarchs. And they were just, I'm done, I'm cooked, I've got nothing to do, I don't want to be here, I just want to die. And when I was able to say, the children are watching, the children are watching, your adult children, your grandchildren are watching. And do you think that you could show them how you would like them to remember you going through this, just as they remembered you all the rest of your life? You have that choice. And amazing people would perk up. Sometimes it took a little bit of, back and forth with it. But that reflection of, we continue to have value always, that lasts forever. Anyway, I'm so glad that meant a lot to you, Astrid. My own mom's 94, and it's the same kind of thing. It's just kind of like, how did you do that thing again? How did you make that pie crust? How'd you do that thing? Would you show us how, please? Very important to her sense of well-being and her matriarchalism.
So we have a question here in the chat from, I hope I pronounced the name correctly, Sharman Richardson. And the question is, what is your advice for pursuing a path in spiritual work through hospice and other settings?
Oh my goodness. I actually went through that, and I can only tell you what my route was. I found that through my life, I was exposed to many, many different losses, deaths, all of those kind of things. And I became very interested in what different world traditions said about death and dying. I think also having different sort of experiences with expanded consciousness through holotropic breath work, through mysticism, prayer, those kind of things, made it so that I was very curious about consciousness itself. And so at one point, I went on a spiritual quest to see what would be of value to me to do for the rest of my life as an elder, as an older woman, with the communications and curiosity that I had. So the way I did it is I went back into seminary. I went to an interfaith seminary with a special focus on understanding many faith traditions, many belief systems, and then went through different programs like being with dying and Upaya Zen Center, basically being thirsty for any bit of information that was going to give me different perspectives. As one person, I just know it's going to happen for me at some point. but how can I learn from others? And from then learning that, it was putting myself as a hospice, doing hospice training for the veterans through the Twilight Brigade, doing that hospice training and working with veterans as a hospice volunteer, to Carré, another different hospice training that I went through, and just training, being in the experience with people who are dying. And one of the things, and also clinical pastoral education. So to answer your question, it would probably be through, if you wanted to do something which was spiritual, pretty much do something that has to do with the study of belief systems and religious traditions. Then also study the dying process and what hospice is about. I also did a special certification in palliative care. I find that it is in the time of illness, aging, and diagnosis that people have the greatest struggles about, shall I continue treatment and have my life be about the treatment, and what are the pros and cons of that? Or then moving into hospice and comfort care, that's almost where there's a bit of acceptance, a little bit more acceptance and relief. The struggle is really before that acceptance of comfort care happens. And I find that a particularly rich spiritual growth, meaning making kind of time. So I would just basically do as much as you can to expose yourself to all of those different ways of being. There are conferences all over. As it's fascinating. It's fascinating, I think. In my earlier career, I was involved in a creative services business that focused primarily on healthcare and spirituality. And I find this work to be the most creative of all, because it really is the creativity of the human spirit. It really is. I hope that's helpful.
I hope so too. And you sure gave a lot of suggestions and ideas. And I think you're right. It's being at the bedside that, that's where it is. That's where it happens.
And
Yeah.
I think that also when people do volunteer for hospice and go through that training where you have to clear yourself, it's so important. You do not want to have somebody that has not been cleared their own woundedness. You do not want to project your own woundedness into some other vulnerable people. You want to have that pretty much worked out, or at least be very aware of it, so that you can be a safe person, holding yourself and being open to allow that other person to open themselves out to whatever is showing up for them. And I bet you have a pretty rigorous volunteer training program, Astrid.
Yes, we do. We do an online volunteer training through the Hospice and Palliative Care Organization of Washington State.
Great.
And it's pretty extensive. Yeah. And then I do specialized trainings as needed. Mhm.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I'll second that as someone that has seen her training and they're doing, and unbelievable, excellent. It's just so much a pleasure to be part of this organization.
That's wonderful, John. And don't you think that everybody should have hospice volunteer training? Because we are all going to need it for our loved ones, our friends, our family, and ourselves. It's almost like it's an education that I feel should be required. And what if it was required as a high school course? Or, just because that's when people are just starting to find like their grandparents are dying. It just seems that there's so much value for that personal integration piece that you get from doing the hospice volunteer training.
Yeah, that's very true.
I see Anne Marie shaking her head. Yes.
Yes, I was just thinking too, because I did go through the volunteer training in the Capital District of New York last year. And a lot of people come to hospice after a personal experience with hospice with a loved one. And wouldn't it be nice to have that training before you get there? Because a lot of them, oh my God, if I would have known this, or if I would have known that, I would have handled certain situations differently in my own personal, so that, yeah, I really like that idea. So
yeah, I think so too.
who knows?
And that's what's wonderful about like the death cafes that Astrid is talking about. Those are nice little step your toe into sort of things.
Mhm.
Those are really, really important opportunities in our death-defying culture that we have here.
Yeah, we have another question, a comment and a question from Beth Prevost. She says, great talk, thanks. And the question is, any suggestions on helping someone with dementia? Will your suggested interventions work with those patients?
I love working with dementia patients. The beautiful thing about being a volunteer or a non-family member with a dementia patient is that you can meet them right where they are. You are not burdened by knowing who they once were. You're not burdened by the fact that they don't recognize you anymore or confuse you with somebody else. So you can be a very healing presence for the person with dementia. And you can also be a very healing person to their family because you can exemplify that you can meet them where they are with compassion, with no expectations other than you are people in the moment. You very likely you will not be having the conversation with the dementia person, but one of the things you can do is that you can help them with retaining interest and dignity. There is a dementia patient, my favorite thing to do with her is bring out her, make her, not make her, but give her the opportunity to match her jewelry. Put these earrings together, make these matches. For men, they love to sort screws and things like that. And while you are with them, they are doing that and you are providing a compassionate presence with them. And it makes all the difference to their life so they're able to remain engaged in the world to the degree that they can without feeling less than.
That's very true, very true. It reminds me of a short video I saw where the daughter was caring for her father with dementia, was getting all this bubble wrap and kept telling him that the job was to pop the bubbles because that's what was needed. And she was getting bubble wrap from all over the place to keep him occupied. And he felt like he had a job to do and he felt useful.
Purpose,
And
purpose.
yeah, and it works, because in that reality of someone who has dementia, that is their reality. So that's what they're doing. It
Exactly.
doesn't matter that it's subject.
I heard a beautiful and very practical thing that just the other day, someone was talking about their father with dementia. It had this tendency of waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and it was just driving her crazy because she just wasn't getting any sleep. But he loved to fold clothes. So what she did is that before she went to sleep, she would open up all the drawers and dump the things out, and then he would wake up and she would have to wake up and say, oh, can you help me with this? I really need these clothes folded. And he would fold clothes from 3 o'clock until 5 o'clock in the morning and feel very satisfied.
Yeah.
So having purpose, dignity, and lots and lots of love. And really redirection and having yourself be not triggered or impatient. There is a belief that people with dementia have a higher attunement to falsehoods and to people that have, what can you say, less than kind agendas. So make sure that you are grounded and loving and patient.
Yeah, and truthful.
Truthful.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm looking at the chat. There's no question at the moment, but I have one. Some not so much a question, but if you can address, you mentioned briefly that some people, may reject spirituality because they associate it with religion in a way, and they may have been damaged by a belief system.
Yes.
So how would you approach somebody? How would you know, that they may just say, I don't want to talk about this. I don't need the chaplain. I don't need anybody to be with me. So how would you approach somebody who's quite reticent because of damage caused in the past?
Astrid, you just asked one of my absolute favorite questions. I have been struggling with this with our intake people because they say, well, do you want to see a chaplain? It's just like, no, I'm not ready. It's like, no, I don't want angels to play harps, and no, I don't want a Christian chaplain or whatever it is. And even when somebody comes in and they say non-religion or don't want anything, when they come under our hospice census, I will still call them and say, hello, I am part of your hospice team, and my specialty is emotional and spiritual support at this time. And who does not want to have a little bit of emotional and spiritual support? They might not quite understand the spiritual, but everybody understands. And I say, for yourself or your family. So some people will decline, like, not for me, until they get comfortable with it and they start seeing the conversation or hearing the conversation, and then it kind of draws them in. If somebody identifies as like Protestant, Lutheran, yes, I want to see a chaplain, then I just call and say, hi, I'm the chaplain. I'd like to come and see you and meet you and your family. But if it's something that's non-religious or atheist or something like that, I will say, I'm part of your team. Sometimes I even introduce myself. Hi, my name is Lynda. I'm on the team. I'm the golden lab of the team, I'm just, and so it's just like any kind of access point that I can. Sometimes many times people will say, we think that we have it covered because we do have our own priest, or we have our own clergy, or our own rabbi. And even with that, I will say that is wonderful, and that's great. And I have special information. I'm part of the team, and I have some special expertise in this part of life that might be a little bit different than your clergy or your rabbi or your priest. And because many times the priest, if they're so spread so thin that they're pretty much coming in for sacraments, sacrament of the sick, communion, and they're done. And people need more ongoing of that processing. It really is about that processing of how they are going to prepare themselves to kind of do their final farewell. But to answer your question, I change it according to how they might have identified when they come in. So I say more often spiritual care, spiritual emotional support, or emotional spiritual support. Sometimes I just say emotional support. Also, I do work closely with people who have their own clergy or their own rabbi and consult with it. Research studies have shown that, especially in hospitals, people that rely only on their outside clergy tend to have more intrusive, what is the word? Kind of unnecessary or heroic sort of treatments, because they're hoping for the miracle. And not only that, but the outside clergy does not have access to the medical records to actually understand what is really going on with this person's body. They don't have that access. So their role is to promise the moon. And so it's been proven that if patients only have that, then they tend to accept hospice much later, and then they don't get the full benefit of that hospice time, which I find is very precious.
Yeah, it brings to my mind the definition of hope, I mean, hope at all cost, so that you might actually miss on hospice benefits, or, and you talk about hope quite a lot in your presentation. And so I'm kind of wondering, do you consider that hope is one of the goals that you might be aiming for, or that you hope that the client will, aim for?
I like to find out what it is that somebody does have some hope for. If it's a hope to be remembered, or a hope, like literally today, I met with a man who is dying probably within the next few days. And his hope is that his land will be donated to the city to be a dog park. That is his hope. There was a man in the hospital, and he kept saying he goes, "Mother, I'm not ready yet." He was lots of visitations. "Mother, I'm not ready yet." Later, he was talking to his deceased mother, like she died like 30 years earlier. And finally, what it was that his hope was that his grandson was going to be able to fly in and see him, because he had a Star of David that he wore, and he wanted to give it to his grandson. That was his hope. And once he did that, he died within 2 hours. But his hope was to make that connection. So understanding what somebody's hope is and how you can, and it's not false hope. That's another thing too. False hope, I sort of connect with the idea of what I would call spiritual bypass. And that is when people are absolutely fundamentally adamant that they are going to receive a miracle, and only by pure strength of will is that happened. So if they do not have the miracle, they are failures, because somehow some other thought came in and they were not strong enough to be able to push that thought out. And so they are failures at not receiving that miracle, because they let somebody talk about, "Oh, well, and when you do die, how would you like your funeral service to be?" So those kind of things, I think, are not healthy, the spiritual bypass things. So I try to say, yes, and even with my own mom, and maybe in 20 years. So let's say that your body is tired in 20 years. How would you like that to look? So pushing it off into the future, so that they can hold it a little, it's not as close, and they can still hold on to that hope, and yet still plan for something and engage with something, so that you know what they want and what they're interested in, and how you can help them, how you can support them. But I do think that hope is very important, because how people's beliefs are affect what kind of care they want, what is important to them. For some people, for doctors, for example, they might think, my only hope is that I want this person to have this cancer cure. To the patient, their hope might be that they want to ride their golf cart around that 18 holes one more time. So finding out what their hope is, and can it be supported, or can a bit of it be supported? What aspect of it? How close can you get to helping them receive that hope?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's a sort of stages of hope. I always have in mind the image of, the person who likes to be outdoors, and then they can't walk anymore. So you wheel them outside, and then they can't be wheeled anymore. So you open the window. I mean, you keep that concept going,
Absolutely. The same man today that wanted his property to be a dog park, he had this crazy little golf carty thing. It had skulls and screaming cats and all kinds of things on it. And I suggested to his partner that she just park it his bed, now he has a hospital bed, is near the window, and he's looking out over this field into the trees. And I said, what about if you could just bring that cart over and park it so that he can see it? And she said, yes, that would be, he'd love that, because that's what he would do every day, spend all day on this, traveling around like, crazy man, Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, going over the bumps and things, this little golf cart. So just being able to think, and it's an identity, that is me. That's me out there.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Well,
Yeah. Sorry,
I
I just wanted to say one thing that I've noticed you've mentioned several times, and how you were saying something, you were going, yes, and I just love that so it's not just accepting what's there, and it's kind of like expanding it into something else instead of going, yes, but, or, like to kind of like being contradictory. So the yes and, which is kind of like just so I really appreciated that. And I've put it in the comment, but that was quite a master class on spirituality and healing. So I can't thank you enough. Your delivery was phenomenal. It's just so clear. And you bring in some examples that are relevant, that are like just pertinent. It was just really, really impressive. So I can't thank you enough. That was brilliant. I'm so glad I attended.
Oh,
I didn't know what to expect, but this blew any expectation I could have had out of the water. So thank you so much. That was, yes.
Yeah, thank you, Lynda. And we are at the end of the hour. And so I want to remind you that, we do this series every other month. Next time in July, we're going to talk about funeral practices and consumers' rights. And in September, I just secured, and I'm very excited, I just secured a talk with Dr. Christopher Kerr, who talks about end-of-life experiences. It's Kerr, K-E-R-R. It will be in September, and look him up. He's quite a person to bring as well. So Lynda, you put us on a path here of wanting to know more. I think that's at least what I get out of that. I want to revisit this talk, and I want to bring it to all the volunteers, who couldn't be with us today. And again, it will be on our website, and all of you who registered will receive the recording before it gets on the website. So you'll have it very shortly. Thank you so much, Lynda. Thank you.
thank you so much. And please visit my website if you want any updates on news. I do mentoring, all kinds of things. And I'm so appreciative of you being here. And my hope is that when I work with patients, that I can help them generate that same kind of curiosity about what's coming next.
And I put your website in our chat, so you also get the chat. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I appreciate this deeply.
Thank you. Thank you, Lynda. We'll be in touch very soon. Thank
Okay.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.